we have our authors, Lodge and Roosevelt, who this morning are discussing with us a particular American Revolution fight. And remember, each time they've emphasized leadership in different ways. And of course, that's going to happen again with this American hero tale. They also introduce each section with a bit of poetry, which I love them for. Patriotic poetry is not so much part of our culture anymore, and it's worth revisiting. And they pull some verses from a poem here by Guy Humphrey McMaster. In their ragged regimentals stood the old Continentals, yielding not, when the grenadiers were lunging, and like hail fell the plunging cannon shot, when the files of the Isles from the smoky night encampment bore the banner of the rampant unicorn, and drummer, drummer, drummer rolled the roll of the drummer through the morn. Then with eyes of the front all, and with guns horizontal, stood our sires, and the balls whistled deadly, and in streams, flashing redly, blazed the fires as the roar on the shore swept the long battle breakers o'er the green sodded acres of the plains. Someone there drunk delight of battle with his peers on the plains of windy Troy, I think. And we must be aware that there can be a tendency to glamorize battle, but we've gone a long way as a society toward avoiding that tendency, and instead perhaps sliding into not taking proper view with the virtues of a good military leader, and this is a bit of tonic for that. One of the heroic figures of the Revolution, they begin, was Anthony Wayne, Major General of the Continental Line. With the exception of Washington and perhaps Greene, he was the best general the Americans developed in the contest. And without exception, he showed himself to be the hardest fighter produced on either side. He belongs with men like Winfield Scott, Phil Kearny, Hancock, and Forrest, who reveled in the danger and the actual shock of arms. Of course, they wrote this in 1895, so they didn't use Patton as the ultimate example of an American military leader who seemed to revel in battle and the shock of arms. But they go on to describe his virtues a bit more. His eager love of battle and splendid disregard of peril have made many writers forget his really great qualities. That's an interesting comment. Anthony Wayne, so many things are named after him. In fact, I graduated high school in Wayne County High School, Georgia. I'm pretty sure it wasn't for years after leaving Wayne County High School that the epiphany happened to me that, of course, our county and our high school were named after General Wayne of the American Revolution, best known by his nickname, Mad Anthony. And this nickname coming from reckless bravery in battle. Our authors think have, over the years, made people have sort of a cartoon picture of Anthony Wayne, that they see the great leader, known only by his nickname, more as sort of a Yosemite Sam figure who's just snarling and shooting and charging. That mad, meaning crazy. It's certainly a little bit crazy to revel in battle, as Mad Anthony Wayne seemed to, or George Patton seemed to. But both of these men were very rational commanders. Editorializing here, Roosevelt tells us a man who lacks the fondness of fighting, the eager desire to punish his adversary, and the willingness to suffer punishment in return may be a great organizer, like McClellan, but can never become a great general or win great victories. There are, however, men who, though they possess these fine manly traits, the fine manly trait of being eager to punish your enemy, yet lack the head to command an army. Wayne had the heart and the hand, but the head likewise. So, what happens here to set up our battle for the day? Washington was prompt to recognize in Wayne a soldier to whom could be entrusted any especially difficult enterprise that called for the exercise of intelligence and of cool daring. Well, there's a contradiction of the nickname. We don't think of madness as cool daring. In the summer of 1780, he was very anxious to capture the British fort at Stony Point, which commanded the Hudson. This is about 30 miles north of New York City. And he can't lay a normal siege against this fort because British frigates, with their heavy gunpowder, these sailing ships control the river and can bombard the shore. So any normal siege of the fort is going to run into a pounding from British artillery that makes it more or less impossible to take the fort itself. So Washington suggests to Mad Anthony that Wayne might try a night attack. And Anthony Wayne is eager to do this. It was exactly the kind of enterprise in which he delighted. The fort was on a rocky promontory surrounded on three sides by water and on the fourth by a neck of land. Across this neck, any attacking column had to move. The garrison was 600 strong. Now, this is going to be one of those occasions in the American Revolution when the decisive weapon, and I'm sorry, this one is slightly anachronistic for the talk. It's a slightly later model. They didn't change much, though. Maybe you can see the triangular cross-section in the little camera here. The decisive weapon is the bayonet. And to quote General Patton, it is not the sharpness of the bayonet. It is the gleam in the attacker's eye that will break the enemy line. Wayne's favorite weapon, writes Roosevelt, was the bayonet. Like Scott, he taught his troops until they were able to, in the shock of hand-to-hand conflict, to overthrow the renowned British infantry who prided themselves on their prowess with cold steel. It was at the Battle of Germantown Wayne's troops who, falling on with the bayonet, drove the Hessians and the British light infantry, and only retreated under orders when the attack had failed elsewhere. So, pressing forward in a night attack to attempt to surprise this fort and capture it by close quarter fighting. The kind of thing that, if detected, is going to result in a high casualty disaster and no chance to capture it. It was nearly midnight when the Americans began to press along the causeways toward the fort. Before they were near the walls, they were discovered, and the British opened a heavy fire of great guns and musketry, to which the Carolinians, advancing between the two columns, responded in their turn according to orders, but the men in the columns were forbidden to fire. So now the warning has been given. It's too late. It's too late to make this attack work. What does Mad Anthony do? Makes it work anyway. Wayne had warned them the work must be done with the bayonet, and the muskets were not even loaded. Moreover, so strict was the discipline that no one was allowed to leave the ranks, and when one of the men did so, an officer promptly ran him through the body. So the British open fire. The troops have only one way to go, and that is dead forward. And when they open fire, the troops charging columns break into a run, plunge into the abatis of fallen timber, and no less than 17 of the 20 men on the left are killed or wounded of the ones who first hit that. But as the columns came up, both burst through the down timber. That's the right and the left columns, with the Carolinians in the middle providing covering fire. Burst through the down timber and swarmed up the long, sloping embankments of the fort. The British fought well, but the Americans would not be denied and pushed silently on to end the contest with the bayonet. A bullet struck Wayne in the head. He fell, but struggled to his feet and forward, two of his men supporting him. A rumor went among the men he was dead, but it only impelled them to charge home more fiercely than ever. The Brits kept up their vaunted volley fire. The Americans did not, closing with the bayonet. The Americans had the advantage that only comes from delivering an attack that is thrust home. They have no choice because of their weapons and their tactical situation, the fact that their guns are unloaded, to charge in and be decisive. So the result here is an American victory, as you can probably guess from the fact that they chose this particular fight, although we will find battles later they chose as examples of good leadership that are not necessarily American victories. There was great rejoicing among the Americans. Wayne speedily recovered from his wound, and in the joy of his victory, it weighed but slightly. He had performed a most noble feat. No night attack of the kind was delivered with greater boldness, skill, and success. When the Revolutionary War broke out, the American armies were composed merely of armed yeomen, that is, not of trained professional soldiers. Stalwart men of good courage and fairly proficient in the use of their weapons, but entirely without the training which could enable them to withstand the attack of British regulars or deliver an attack themselves. And they go on to say that Washington at Trenton had been the first to have his army trained up to the point where it could meet the British on equal terms, but that this attack at Stony Point was an even better and later example, showing the better training and leadership that allowed Americans to meet the British on their own terms. And here we have a picture of the wounded Mad Anthony Wayne being carried forward by his troops. It's kind of a stylized picture of the victory at Stony Point, and this mural is featured at the United States Capitol. No American commander has ever displayed greater energy and daring, a more resolute courage or readier resource than the chief of the hard-fighting Revolutionary generals, Mad Anthony Wayne. That's the verdict that Lodge and Roosevelt give us on it. Well, let's talk briefly about character themes. I'm reusing this screen here with a couple of words changed. Repetition of important things about leadership is part of the Hero Tales book. And not just repetition of some of the things that are alike, but also pointing out some differences. Physical courage is something we've seen emphasized in every single story so far. And the madness of Anthony here, his reckless daring. Okay, reckless to us usually means a decision that's not thought through. And that's the literal meaning of the word. It means not reckoned, not thought up. But that, in a sense, is a positive word when it's used to describe the physical bravery of these commanders. What reckless means in that context is Anthony is not worrying about his physical safety to the detriment of his command. He's not reckoning with that. He's counting himself as a potential loss and accepting it in order to fight more effectively. And, the man is literally shot in the head and keeps going. That is what they're pointing out as a terrific example of physical courage. But not by itself does that win battles. He is not simply a berserker like the old Vikings. Because he's not thinking about his safety, he's not overcome with some sort of mad rage, but instead able to think clearly and make good decisions to win the battle. He's described as an able and vigilant commander, an able and bold tactician, a vigilant and cautious leader, well fitted to bear the terrible burden of responsibility. So, as Roosevelt has you read about Mad Anthony, he's encouraging you to look at what are really the most important things about this commander in action. And I must say, in 1898, a few years later, when Theodore Roosevelt is leading his own Rough Riders in battle in the Spanish-American War, he seems to have taken his own lessons very much to heart. He's not worried about his own safety. He does not reckon it. He exposes himself boldly to enemy fire as much as any soldier under his command and leads from the front, but not in a berserk fashion. The charge at Kettle Hill in the Spanish-American War is bold, yes. It's also a perfectly timed and effective tactical maneuver, not just giving in to rage. Finally, we talked about total commitment last time around, and total commitment is enforced on Mad Anthony's men by sending most of them, other than the covering fire party of Carolinians, and by the way, they can always rely on us Carolinians, whether North Carolina or West Carolina. Us Carolinians always have the marksmanship attribute ready to go. So he relies on these Southern boys to provide the covering fire. But both of the attacking columns don't even have gunpowder in their muskets. They are to attack with total commitment with the bayonet. And the bayonet in American military history is a symbol of total commitment, taught often years after it was actually a practical weapon in battle. Patton would have argued, and did argue, that the training in the bayonet was more important for what you taught your brain about total commitment in battle than for any potential of use. So, as usual, I've run just a little bit over time. Thank you for bearing with me. How does Wayne stack up, old Mad Anthony, when he's weighed in the balance? Well, Washington watched him fighting in battles in which his tactics didn't always pay off. But in the battles in which he was engaged that were American defeats, and sometimes in which his men took heavy casualties, Washington no less saw characteristics in this man that he said, this is a good field commander. And when the day happened that he said, Stony Point needs to be taken, a bold but clear thinking commander is the guy who could maybe do this in a night attack. Who is that man among all my commanders? Anthony Wayne. Wayne doesn't just have that tribute in the Capitol of that beautiful mural at the Capitol building, but statues in a couple of places out there. Naturally, there's been at least one petition to get rid of Wayne's statues in one locale today because of the fanatical wave that we're undergoing right now to repudiate heroes. I'm going to encourage you instead, if you're interested in Mad Anthony, there's an old Landmark, I believe Landmark was the publisher, youth biography of Anthony Wayne that gives you some insight into his character, and a good deal more out there to read about him as a commander, of which he is an excellent model. Okay, thank you folks for joining me this morning. Let's see, it's 9:22, so I'm my usual 7 minutes or so over time. And I've had a good time revisiting some of these American Revolution battles. We have a change in tone with the new month coming up. We're going to talk about the moral courage next week of Governor Morris. And after that, we have several in a row of naval exploits of the early sailing ship era Navy of the United States. Those are going to be great things to go over in the month of October.